bring in our panel. Joining us from Austin, Texas is Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. She's an immigration attorney. From Miami, Florida, Jaden Horan is a political analyst. Here with us in Washington, D.C., Imani Cheers is a cultural curator and associate professor of digital storytelling at George Washington University. And Frank Sesno is a professor with the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University and a former CNN Washington bureau chief. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Frank, just minutes after this horrendous shooting in Minneapolis, social media was filled with videos of this incident. It wasn't just one or two videos. There were dozens of videos. We saw it from all kinds of angles. And just a short while later, there was the battle for the narrative of what happened. We saw on the one side the Trump administration, on the other the protesters. Well, here is some of what the Secretary for Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, had to say in the aftermath of the shooting. Let's listen.
When you perpetuate violence against a government because of ideological reasons and for reasons to resist and perpetuate violence, that is the definition of domestic terrorism. This individual who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism. That's the facts.
So, Kristi Noem, they're very emphatic. That's the facts, according to her. Are those the facts, Frank?
No, not at all. And what other people in responsible positions in government have done for many, many years, and they're being urged to do it again, is you don't declare the facts before an investigation takes place. One of the biggest points of tension that we often have in Washington and elsewhere is people in the media, people like me when I was a journalist, we want answers now. And we lean on officials like Kristi Noem and others for answers now. And they almost always say, before we say anything, an investigation needs to take place. We know what we see and what we don't see. What she did there was she declared intent. She declared a set of events in the way they took place. And she pronounced sort of finality on a situation that had barely just taken place. And now, as you point out, which has been apparently contradicted by all these videos that we've seen. So it hurls the administration into a deeper crisis of both, unfolding events and credibility.
Imani Cheers, what do you make of the fact that there are multiple investigations taking place right now? As we heard from our reporter, the federal investigators appear to be taking the lead. That's the FBI and the Customs and Border Protection. Local state investigators had to go to court to be part of this investigation. Are you confident there's going to be a transparent, open inquiry into what happened here?
No, not at all. I'm actually still waiting for transparency from the murder of Renee Macklin Good. So I have zero faith in this current administration that this is going to be a transparent investigation. We already saw it, as my colleague Frank Sesno just mentioned, this jump to conclusions. And we know anyone has any understanding that you wait for facts to come in and you verify that information. And unfortunately, we have an administration that is very quick to demonize individuals who they feel are, quote unquote, against their administration and their policies and their practices. And we're seeing that the way in which they villainize them and they refer to them in all sorts of derogatory terms until they realize that information is coming out that does not support the narrative that they want to continue to portray. And as it relates to Alex Peretti, as it relates to Renee Good, and as it relates to a number of individuals that have been killed at the hands of ICE, I don't have any confidence. We're even seeing today that the NRA, shockingly enough, came out and said that, wait a minute, we actually believe that this gentleman was a rightful carrier of his firearm. And we also know from all the verification that came out through all the other evidence, all the other angles that we saw, that he was not actually holding that weapon, that he was actually defending a woman that was being violated, violently pushed to the ground, and was pepper sprayed.
Yeah. Imani, as you point out, of course, this was the second killing. The first one on January 7th was Renee Good, who was shot and killed as well. This is what the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had to say. Let's listen.
To Americans who are watching this right now, and I don't know, maybe you're watching it with curiosity, bewilderment, horror, scorn, or sympathy. I've got a question for all of you. What side do you want to be on? The side of an all-powerful federal government that can kill, injure, menace, and kidnap its citizens off the streets? Or on the side of a nurse at the VA hospital who died bearing witness to such government? Or the side of a mother whose last words were, "I'm not mad at you"?
So, Imani, powerful words there from the governor of Minnesota, but should there be a more forceful response from the Democrats on this?
I hope so. I mean, because we also know that it's not just the two individuals we refer to. It's also Keith Porter Jr. and a number of other individuals who have been killed at the hands of ICE, not only in Minneapolis, but in other cities. But we'll stay here for a moment and focus there. There needs to be a coordinated, consistent, and concise response from Democratic leadership. And at the moment, we are not seeing that. And it's very frustrating because it is not warranted to become passive right now. We need forceful, we need unity, but in particular, we need our elected officials across the aisle to honestly come out and denounce the utter and complete escalation. We're seeing an escalation of force from ICE. I mean, everything from wearing masks to going in. We saw recently with the use of children to encourage, to enforce, however you want to respond to it.
Yeah.
Act like we've seen enough, and I would love for Democratic officials to respond in urgency, because right now it is not.
Jayden Horan, there appears to be some change of heart on the part of Republicans. I mean, up to now, they've marched in lockstep with the president on most of these immigration issues, but PBS reports that there are now growing calls among Republicans for a transparent investigation. I mean, administration officials were very quick to frame this, or frame Alex Pretty as an instigator, and they even went to the extent of calling him a domestic terrorist very quickly. But are we seeing Republicans now break with the president on this?
I don't think that's really seeing Republicans break with the president. I think what we're seeing is the administration wants to control the narrative. It appears that DHS got out ahead of the administration on messaging related to this. We have seen Caroline Leavitt and the White House walk it back and welcome a secondary state investigation. I think we've seen the rhetoric between Donald Trump and Governor Walz take a different turn in the last 24 hours. The deployment of Tom Homan, who supposedly has good relationships with the elected politicians in Minnesota, the departure of Bovino, to reframe the narrative. Avoidable deaths of American citizens, of anyone, in the enforcement of federal law is something that the federal government should seek to do. And obviously the optics and the actual loss of life is causing the administration to take pause on how this is executed. But that doesn't change the fact that elected officials should not encourage people to break the law. In the case of this second shooting, the fact that this person was a lawful, lawfully carrying and following their Second Amendment rights, and at the same time impeding federal officials, means there needs to be an investigation. Just ipso facto bringing or exercising your right to bear arms does not mean that you're a domestic terrorist, and does not mean that you're threatening federal law enforcement. It certainly, in an investigation, can take into account for why someone reacted the way they did or perceived a threat. But at the same time, I believe after this that elected officials in Minnesota are looking to discourage individuals from putting their bodies on the line in the way of impeding in the execution of federal laws, especially in relation to pulling out these criminals. 87% of Americans support deporting and, first of all, arresting and deporting these individuals. So the public opinion is on the side of enforcement. It is about the optics of enforcement and how this is being done.
Yeah.
Obviously, cooperation and collaboration with state and local officials is a much better way to ensure that this is done than an aggressive federal response.
Kate, we've seen thousands of ICE agents being deployed on the streets of Minneapolis, and this is ostensibly about immigration. We've seen this immigration crackdown being carried out by these ICE agents very, very aggressively. And it's resulted, as we've just been reporting, in the deaths of 2 people just this month. It's also resulted in mass demonstrations in Minneapolis. But we've also seen clear cases of racial profiling. And as you have pointed out on social media, it seems the ICE agents go after people who have an accent that is not, I guess, would be considered American. Is this administration following the law?
Well, the Supreme Court actually issued a decision that only applied to California several months ago, in which they said essentially that ICE could use something like someone's color of their skin or their type of work that they do or their accent. So unfortunately, that sent a message to ICE and CBP that they could racially profile, even though that's not the application of the case. We've seen video of ICE agents and CBP agents claiming out in the streets that they can racially profile or use their accents. So we know that that is happening, but we also know, I mean, as we've seen in the case of Renee and Alex, that they are just going after anyone out on the streets. They're not going after dangerous people with criminal histories. And then when people come out and exercise their legal right to record or be present or witness an incident, they can be killed now. And then right after the fact, accused of, even just in the previous interview with Jaden, impeding law enforcement. That's not accurate. I mean, one could, I think, disagree about what Renee was doing with her car. Well, now the evidence is clear. You look at the video with Alex, he was holding a phone in his hand. He was not interfering. He did not actively reach out or get in front of an officer. He was on his hands and knees, and they shot him in the back of the head 10 times after they had disarmed him. So I also think that we need to be rejecting these talking points about protesters trying to impede law enforcement. That's not what these peaceful protesters are doing. They are merely witnessing law enforcement out there on the streets, which is completely legal. And I encourage people to continue to do it, because it is precisely this evidence that doesn't allow the administration to lie to us, even though that they've attempted to do it. We can all see what happened with our own eyes.
And Kate, what about, as you point out, you know, they're going after everyone on the streets. I mean, what about the case of the 5-year-old boy who was taken by ICE? There's also a case of a 2-year-old girl who was seized and flown to Texas. She was subsequently returned to her mother. But what is behind that?
I mean, let me just say, I've been an immigration lawyer for 20 years. I've worked on many, many cases of children being detained and separated from their families, and I have seen this stuff up close. That little 5-year-old boy, again, there were lies about his dad left him and fled. That didn't happen. They detained him and his dad outside their home. Meanwhile, the mother was inside the house, and they were trying to lure her out of the house. She didn't come out, presumably because she was afraid. And we find out that 20 minutes later, her other child came home. And I can only imagine this mother standing inside her house, peering out the window, looking at her husband and her 5-year-old, who entered the country lawfully, by the way. They applied for asylum and they were admitted into the country. Imagine her looking out the window, being lured out and having to say, no, I can't come outside right now because my other son is about to come home. And then the administration detains this husband and this little boy who's wearing a little bunny hat because his name is Conejo, which means bunny in Spanish. And they take him into detention, and this mother is home waiting for her other child. It's unimaginable cruelty. It is unacceptable. And then you add on the layer where they come out and they claim that this father abandoned his child. The way that they vilify these people after the fact is unacceptable. And again, I'm so glad that Minnesotans and others are brave enough to record these events so that we all know the truth and we can't be lied to over and over by this administration.
All right. Frank, as our reporter Dan Williams told us, there has been a change in tone since this incident. There have been efforts to lower the temperature. There's been that telephone call between the governor of Minnesota and President Trump. And President Trump is now holding out the possibility of actually withdrawing some of the ICE agents from Minneapolis. Still, he has threatened to use something called the Insurrection Act if this continues. That will mean deploying United States military troops on the ground. Is that still likely?
I think it's less likely now. I think for reasons that we just heard, the public is mobilized. This is a remarkable moment that we're seeing. I'm very reluctant to call it an inflection point or anything else because we're in such unpredictable territory. But there are times when an image or an event is a galvanizing image and event. And what we have seen in a host of images and people and statements coming out of Minnesota in recent days takes this entire confrontation to a new level. People need to understand that Minneapolis is a city with very strong civic pride and identity. And the people who are turning out in the streets by the thousands, maybe the hundreds of thousands, are rallying in a way that is sending a powerful signal really across the country. The Republicans who are now calling on President Trump and DHS to change their ways, this is a very significant break. Ted Cruz today said, the senator from Texas, the DHS should be more measured. The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, said that the White House should recalibrate its immigration enforcement. Now, the governor of Texas has been way out front and a hawk on immigration. So for him to be feeling the heat and seeing these images and calling for something substantial to change is very, very significant. So the Insurrection Act and calling the military to the streets, I think that would be something that would provoke a nationwide response, the likes of which we have not seen.
Imani, there is one way in which Democrats can respond to this in a very forceful way, and that is to vote down legislation on funding. And part of the funding bill that's sitting right now in Congress would fund ICE. They can decide that they don't want to fund ICE any longer.
I think we know that, unfortunately, the U.S. system is not working. We saw that with last fall as we led to a government shutdown, had a government shutdown, the longest government shutdown in history. And as we're moving forward right now, that threat needs to be an actuality. Right now, they need to say unequivocally, and I mean they, across the board, Democrats, Republicans, anyone with a conscience, anyone who is paying attention, anyone who is listening to their constituents who are saying, wait a minute, we want border security. We obviously want our cities to be safe. We obviously do not want criminals roaming our streets with impunity, but we also do not want to have immigration, customs enforcement knocking down doors, dragging people out of their cars, murdering people in the street with impunity. We don't want them using children as bait for individuals who they believe might be in the country illegally. And we need to have that level of this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get it.
Okay, Jaden, I've just got a few minutes left, and I'd be grateful if you could be brief. But what is your response to the fact that this legislation is sitting in Congress right now? It could be voted down. We could see another government shutdown.
The Democrats would own another government shutdown. Again, the American people, even in the wake of the enforcement action in Minnesota, are overwhelmingly in support of removing all illegals, not just criminals. And that's across 4 major polls released this week. So politically and optically, you know, the Democrats need it for their activist base, but the American people do not support it. And I don't see how it's beneficial for them long term for yet another government shutdown for DHS funding and ICE funding, which they have voted for every time. And they, you know, say with rhetoric that they believe it needs to be enforced even as their activist base calls for it to be defunded.
Yeah. Kate, I just want to get your view on what it's like as a lawyer representing clients in immigration cases, what it's like to represent them in court and then get decisions that are handed down. I mean, are those decisions, those court orders, do ICE abide by them?
You know, we've lost justice in this country. When the election first happened and I started giving community presentations so that people could understand their rights under the Fifth Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, it almost was like, oh, we were so naive. We were telling everybody what their rights were, assuming that their constitutional protections and their human rights would be followed. And now when I talk to my clients and I give community presentations, instead it's, these are your rights. We should expect them to be violated, and here's how we need to gather evidence so that hopefully we can obtain justice later. The latest of that is the whistleblower memo that tells ICE agents they can enter people's homes without a judicial warrant. And what is one expected to do with that other than have a really good automatic camera on your front porch that can record these agents storming into your door without a warrant? And the reality is we have an administration that is consistently violating people's rights, not following many court orders, and our country is at a very dangerous point. And I have to say, as a Texan, I am somewhat relieved to see people like Governor Abbott and Senator Cruz, who have been very complicit with Trump, finally speak out. And I'm sad that it took the murder of Alex to get us here, but perhaps we have some sanity coming back to this nation right now.
Okay, and Frank, very quickly, one other development which has sent alarm bells ringing, and that is the Attorney General Pam Bondi calling for a list of voters in Minnesota. And I'm afraid I've only got about 10 seconds for this.
Ratchets up the pressure, certainly reinforces the sense that the federal government is essentially at war with the states and hostile to its citizens. And that's one of the reasons I think that Trump and the governor were on the line with one another today, but it shows that this standoff is by no means close to resolution.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.